Welcome to our discussion of this week's article that went out. We're beginning a new series, and it's called The Salt of the Earth. And this article is entitled Salt of the Earth, and it's concentrating mainly on what Yeshua said about you are the salt of the earth, and if salt has lost its flavor, how can it get it back? And with me again is my good friend and brother, Jean Paul, JP. It's a short article. I was wondering if you got any questions out of that.
Of course, I found a few nuggets or a few things that I wanted to ask about. So I guess to start it off, Yeshua says, "You're the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? It is then good for nothing but to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men." What did Yeshua mean by that?
In that part of the world during his time, they had discovered that salt causes the heat to rise in an oven when it's put in there. It's a chemical reaction that's explained in the article. And they would get salt blocks and line the floor of their ovens with them, and then build the fire on top of the salt blocks. And it would cause the fire to be hotter. And, without putting more wood on it. And as they used that oven over a period of time, eventually the salt blocks would lose their saltiness, because the only place that salt can lose its saltiness is in the crucible of fire. And he is relating that to his disciples, because he's saying to them that the only place that they can lose their flavor, they're the salt of the earth, and the only place that they can lose their flavor is in the fire of circumstance. Whenever we get into a situation where it seems like we're in the middle of a fire, being purified. Whenever chemists want to distill an element down to its purest form, they put it over a flame. And after a while, the impure elements in that tube that they've got will come to the surface, so that they can see what those impure elements are and scrape them off, so that they are left with the purity of that particular element. And Yeshua was likening that whole process to us, that John the Immerser said that there's one coming that is more glorious than he, and he will come to immerse, whereas John immersed in water, he will come to immerse in water and in fire. This is how we become pure. The Father doesn't necessarily create the circumstances, but as those circumstances in our life come, and they surely do to every one of us, we are tested in in the heat of that fire of circumstance. And as we remain faithful to his words in the middle of that circumstance, the impure elements within us rise to the surface, whether it be anger or impure thoughts or anything that doesn't have the consistency of purity that Yahweh does. It rises to the top. And if we can see those, then we are able to deal with them and remove them from our lives. But this is why we need one another, because oftentimes we can't see those impure elements as they're rising up within us. And we need the brothers to be able to come, and sisters to be able to come and point out those elements in our lives so that we become aware of them and then can deal with them to get them, to expunge them from our lives. And
very good explanation.
And thus remain pure.
Very good explanation. But now I want to go back because there's something you said that coming back from the Christian background is I just want a bit more explanation. So you said that Yeshua would come, or someone would come and baptize us with spirit and fire. For a lot of people within the understanding of Christianity, the church, as most people know it, that fire is something that they're going to inherit to be able to do something for him. If I understand correctly what you said, that would not be the case when he said he would baptize you with spirit and fire.
No, it's for the benefit of those of us who have changed our makeup by embracing spirit. There is a whole, he's explaining that whole process and what we can expect to move, in the spirit. This is a lifelong journey. It's not a one-time deal. That's why it says in James, or maybe it's 1 John, but to those who endure this life to the end, to them is given the crown of life, life in the spirit. And it's not an automatically done deal. The same with John 1:12, where it says, and I spoke on that verse a little bit in the article, where it says that to those who embrace Yahweh for who he says he is, by keeping his 10 words, to them he gave power to become children of Yahweh. That's not an automatic process just because we make an epitaph of a few words. It's something that is we become over a period of time, because as our makeup changes and we are exposed to the fire of circumstance, it gives us the opportunity to expunge those impure things that rise to the surface in our life. But we have to be willing to do that and to make the choices to continue to move in the spirit with the Father. I found in my own life that it didn't make any difference what I was involved in at any given time, whether it was a cult or a religion or a group of folks that seemed to have it all together. What the Father is looking for is that when he is light. 1 John 1:5 says that Yahweh is light. And so what he does is he puts us in this fire of circumstance to bring those impurities to the surface so we can deal with them and become changed into the light that he is. So what I found, though, that in my experience is that when he illuminates a particular part of my life that I need to deal with, if I don't deal with it, I don't progress any further toward him until I grapple with what he's trying to show me in the spirit, through his spirit in my life, which like I said, as I remove those things from my life, then I become more like spirit, who he is.
Right. So could we equate the fire of circumstance to tribulation? Would that sort of be the same vein?
Absolutely. Tribulation.
Not the tribulation or not the great tribulation, but just tribulation in general.
Well, I know, but people look at, if they are moved out of the comfortableness of a particular area of their life, they complain that they're in tribulation, when it's not some spirit being that's trying to hassle you into doing something wrong, something we can blame all of these elements on in our life. It is simply a process of becoming light like the Father. And I find that most people that complain about the tribulation in their life are not seeing it clearly. They're not seeing it in the light of how Yahweh is seeing it to cause us to become pure.
I had an experience a few months ago. I may have shared this on this platform before, but I had a lot of backache. And I know that for a lot of believers out there that, we're supposed to be healthy, wealthy, and all this jazz if we're following Yeshua or trying to have a relationship with Father. However, it was a very different story for the apostles. They suffered quite a bit. But I was suffering with a back issue, and it got to be quite severe. I had to take some time off work. And I remember one morning getting up and being quite complacent, complaining a lot about how this was unfair. And I was trying to please him as much as I could. And how could this be happening to me? And yada, 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 so on and so forth. And then he spoke to me. He told me, come and speak with me. So I went in my living room where I speak with him. And I got on my knees and we had a little conversation. And I had never had that kind of experience in all my years. I've had quite a few different spiritual experiences over the course of everything that I've gone through. But I was on my knees that day. And when he spoke to me, it was like, it is so difficult to explain. It's like I heard his voice inside me and outside me. It sounded like a thunder. It shook me to the core. It was just a different kind of experience. And this is what he told me. He said, in this life, there will be pain and suffering. Just remember that I will always be with you. And all I want you to do is share with people who I am. I broke down. It affected me so much. I got up, the pain went away. I was able to go outside and do what I was complaining that I could not do prior. And when I came back inside, the pain came back.
Physical labor, you were able to go out.
Physical, correct. It was, I needed to clear the front of the driveway or the front of the garage. In this Eastern Canadian climate that I live in, we get a lot of snow sometimes. And although that we did have a plow guy come in, I still had to go clean off in front of the garage. And I was able to get out there and I was able to do it. And then I came in and the pain came back. It's as if he was showing me that he told me he will be there. He allowed me to be able to do what it is that I wanted to do. Didn't necessarily need to do it that day, but that I wanted to do. And then went back to, this is the state that I was in, that tribulation, if you want to call it that. I learned so much in those I was off work for over a month, and there was a lot of stuff going on in my life and just personal stuff, but it was such a teachable moment. So as I'm listening to you explain this, it makes a lot of sense that, you know, Father loves us so much that, you know, we are not, I guess, above experiencing life like everybody else, right?
No, in fact, Yeshua prayed in John 17 when he's praying to the Father for the disciples. He said, Father, I don't pray that you take them out of the world, but I pray that they become just as you are in the world. And Christianity has an overarching theology that says, you know, we are going to be able to escape the world at some point. Where the Hebrew perspective is not escape, but enduring what we have here on the earth. And this is what Yeshua was reinforcing to the disciples. People ask me a lot, you know, how do I know what the Father's will is in any particular circumstance? And what the Father has shown me is in 1 Thessalonians 5:17, which says, in everything, give thanks to the Father. That's what we were created to be. He has his overall plan for his people, his family, is to become a nation of priests where each one of us minister to Yahweh in our own right, giving sacrifices of thanksgiving and praise to the Father in the middle of whatever circumstance we find ourselves in. And in Ephesians 2, I believe, there's also a verse that says, for everything, give thanks. So not only are we in the situation and giving thanks, being in the situation, we're thanking him for that situation. Even though it may seem harsh and, you know, like our whole life is caving in on us, if we just do that simple little exercise, what I have found in my life is that the Father arranges circumstance to show me how to navigate through these situations that I find myself in. Some of them have been of my own making. Most of them have been of my own making. But some of them just, you know, come as a matter of living. So if we will take that one verse or two verses and apply it to our lives, manifesting that thanks while we're in the midst of whatever circumstance we find ourselves in, I have found that the Father is gracious and merciful, and he might leave me in that place for a while. You know, the Hebrew apostle Shaul, who's also known as Paul, said he had a thorn in the flesh, and he besought the Father 3 times to alleviate it. And each time the Father just said, you know, with my, just be content with who I am for you. That is a wonderful place to be in, when we're just content. The Father said, my grace is sufficient for you. But in another place, Shaul said that he has been abased and he has abounded. But what he has learned is whatever circumstance he finds himself in, therewith to be content. And if we will allow these circumstances to mold us and shape us and bring those elements that to the surface that are getting in our way, and we can deal with them at that point. I found that, you know, on the other side of that, the Father's mercy and grace is just overwhelming. You know, when Yeshua was in the wilderness and he began to be tempted, and the scripture says that he was tempted in every way that we have been. So he knows our languishing in these places. That at the end of that temptation, where he went through several different things, and at the end of it, it said that the Father sent his angels to minister to Yeshua and, you know, gave him sustenance so that he could continue his walk. And I have just found that to be the nature of spirit. And if we can find that place to move in with him, then it really doesn't make any difference what circumstances befall us, because we have a way to be able to not alleviate them, but to endure them. And that's just to give thanks in every situation and for every situation.
That would be an amazing place to be. You know, to be able to live in that state or with that mind frame all the time, that would be quite the experience, living on this earth that way.
Well, it's something you have to work at. It doesn't come naturally.
Right.
But I have found that the more I do it, the easier it comes. It comes up, you know, where I'm able to do it. And I have found that the more that I give thanks to the Father in these situations, that I'm able to endure them a little bit longer than I did the last one. It's an exercise. It's like running a marathon. You don't just get up and run a marathon one day. You have to work at building up your muscles and your lungs and everything that takes to, you know, to make that race.
Yes. Paul talks about that. Well, I don't know if it's the exact same. Well, he talks about running a race. Exactly. Shaul does talk about running a race, right? And I used to be a semi-professional runner for a lot of years. And I hadn't run in a very, very long time. And I started running again last week. And I'll be honest, I'm not nowhere near close to what I used to be able to do. But even in a week, I was able to shave off, I think it's 30 seconds off my time and get my heartbeat down a few beats already. So I can, that analogy works well with me, because I very much understand you're right. You just can't go out and run a marathon. But 15 years ago, I ran a triathlon. I had never done a triathlon.
Oh.
But not a full distance one. It was only a sprint. So I'm a half-mile swim, 28-mile bike, and a 3-mile run. But before I did that, again, I had to train. I went and I got a book on the different techniques of swimming, and then the stages of how you're supposed to train, and all this kind of stuff. So it's applicable. Let's just put it that way. Very applicable.
Yeah, this is not something that just is going to fall on you because you say some words.
And I think that's what I meant when I said being baptized by the Spirit and fire, because I think that's what a lot of people think is going to happen. The fire is going to come on them, and they're just going to,
It'll be a one-time deal, and we'll be done with it.
That's right. And then there's all these healings, and then there's deliverances, and all these prophecies, and all these, we're in the game. We're there. With that, again, that is, well, look, I said that, and I don't know if that was just my thought or how it was taught. But anyways, for me, that's sometimes how I thought. It's just going to fall on you and you're good to go.
Yeah, they have a tendency to promote that type of feeling type thing, but it's a behavior. Everything that is involved with life, the life of the Spirit, is behavioral. We become righteous by our behavior. That's in the definition of righteous in both the Hebrew and the Greek. It's behaviorally connected. And as we follow the 10 words of the Father, it causes our behavior to move more in his direction. And over the course of a lifetime, we will find ourselves in just being spirit like he is.
Right. So you talk about behavior. So that then, again, going back, and I know you've explained this in other articles and stuff, but you talk about choice, because behavior is a choice. We have a lot of control over our behaviors, whether people think we do or that we don't.
The Greek word for power in John 1:12 is exousia. And the definition of exousia means the power of choice. That as we ingratiate ourselves to Spirit and begin to embrace his words and manifest those words, that's where we get the power to choose. He gives us that from the beginning, so that as we are confronted with these different situations in our life, if we stop just a minute and thank the Father for it and wait on him, he will show us how to maneuver our way through whatever obstacle we find there. Oftentimes, for me, it's been behaviors that I need to move in toward others that don't necessarily benefit me at all. That was an interesting observation as I've been going through, but it is tied with the core nature of spirit, which is selflessness, considering the things of my brother as being more significant than the things of my own. And that's the core nature of spirit. Everything else emanates from that one spot.
Wow. So selflessness. So that's a pretty big measuring stick. It's a pretty hefty goal. You were talking and a question came to mind. So, because we're talking about the power of choice. So again, a lot of theology and the belief in the Christian world is that we are born sinners or we are born bad. Is because now we're talking about power of choice. So is that true? Are we born separated from Yahweh? Are we born bad? Or are we just in this navigation to see if we can come to the age where we can recognize that he's there and go try to find him?
The idea that we are sinners from birth did not enter into the Christian lexicon until I can't remember the guy's name, but in his books, he said, you know, he gave the overlay that you know we are sinners from birth. Well, that's not scriptural. You just don't find that anywhere in scripture. Now, what you do find is that a child is born innocent, but he is under the covering, if you will, of his parents. And so they, whatever their belief is, they pass that on to the child. Now, in my situation, my parents didn't give me anything religious. They were worshiping the God of money and success. And that's what I got. And it cost me 2 marriages before I understood that that's some of those impure things that I had floating around in me. I was very competitive. Another thing, but all of these things are as we move through this life, if we are constantly searching for truth. In Jeremiah, it says, with all your heart and with all your might, that if you seek me with all of your with all of your being, with all of your might, I will be found of you. And that's what I have found in my life, that it didn't make any difference where I was in my life. I had a driving force to find truth. Now, at the time, I didn't know what truth was. I didn't even know truth was who until he he answered my beckoning and showed up in front of me and gave me a few words, and I knew immediately with all of my, you talked about hearing his voice within and without. It was the same thing that I found, was that when he spoke to me, I didn't know at the time whether it was audible or inaudible. I just knew that every fiber of my being knew that this was the God of creation, and he was showing up on my turf in my demands to cause me to turn around from where I was, which is the definition of repentance. Repentance is not an epitaph. It is a behavior of a reversal in behavior of 180 degrees, where you leave what you've been walking in and you move in a different direction. And that's what he's looking for in our lives when he shows us this stuff. And if we pursue truth in that manner and continue to do it like that, giving thanks to him for being faithful, to show us the way out of these situations, regardless of whether we created them ourselves or whether they just came upon us. I have found that as I move behaviorally down this journey of life, that every time I make a behavioral repentance, he moves a little closer into me. He has a soft spot for a humble and a contrite heart. And that's what he's looking for in each one of us, in every situation that we can imagine.
Yes, he is. To get there is not an easy task. I grew up a little different. I was instilled in the world of Catholicism, which is a branch of Christianity. As a young child, I knew that there was an external being. I just intuitively knew that there was a God, a creator, but it took a long time fiddling with that, getting out of that morass of lies, and then ending up in Christianity and dealing with those teachings and all that kind of stuff, and getting woken up from that. Been quite the journey. So
was that Pentecostal Christian?
Oh my goodness, I hit them all. I went to Baptist, I went to Pentecostal. What else did I think I hit them all. Anglican, Presbyterian. I went to every single church, faith, healers, the whole gamut. And it was just this, it was quite the journey.
It was experiencing one lie after the other.
Somewhat, but not recognizing it, not recognizing it at the time, right?
Right.
So I did because I didn't fit. I just didn't feel that I fit anywhere. I would end up there. I would get a bit involved, and something was amiss.
It just wasn't right.
It wasn't right. So I'd move on. I'd move along. I'd go to the next, or hit this church, or not. Then I went to a non-denominational church. Anyways, it's just that whole journey. But again, right, if we talk about salt, we talk about tribulation, we talk about these experiences, and I had a lot of experiences with these people in there that he made me a better man through that, because I was looking for him all that time. And I had a conversation with a friend of mine yesterday, and I told him, I says, belief is irrelevant to truth. I've believed a lot of things in my life, and I came to realize that just because I believed them didn't make them true. And he thought about that for a minute. He says, that's right, eh? And I says, that's where you have to be careful on what you believe. So if you can question a little bit, sometimes you'll get. So I had a little bit of a conversation to try to just give him some food for thought in terms of what he believed. So so we talked about salt, and again, this whole conversation goes back to our growth, or our wanting to relate and wanting to get deeper intimacy, becoming ihad with Father. And that's what Yeshua was trying to say when he talked about the salt. Don't let all these things deter you from becoming a better man or getting closer to Father.
That's losing the flavor. And, we can, if we are not exercising being, thanksgiving to the Father, the sacrifice of praise and thanksgiving, if we're not exercising that, if we're not involved in that, what happens is, if we're not careful, we turn bitter. And the scripture says that bitterness will just eat us alive. But more than what it does to us, it it causes us to move away from spirit. It's a harsh fact, but we can lose our flavor if we are not contrite and humble and looking at these circumstances that are invading our life as essential to cause us to be formed and fashioned into the image of spirit.
Right. In the article, there is, so I clicked a couple of links. Obviously, I always do that. Click the links, see what they talk about. There's one of them in Second Chronicles, and I wrote it down. I'm going to read it and get you to explain it. So Second Chronicles, I didn't write the exact verse, but it will be in the article. Ought not ye know that Yahweh, the Elohim of Israel, my goodness, what did I write? Oh, gave the knowledge over Israel forever to David and his sons by a covenant of salt. Do you know, does that have any bearing to anything? How does that relate to what Yeshua said to the disciples? So again, I'm going to try to read that a bit more clearer. Ought not ye know that Yahweh, the Elohim of Israel, gave the kingship over Israel forever to David and his sons by a covenant of salt. You quoted that in the article.
There are many covenants in Scripture. Mostly what I talk about is the overall covenant that Yahweh swore by himself, because there was none higher, to extract to give a means of extracting his family out of the death that they were embroiled in because of the disobedience of Adam. And so the covenant of salt is, I think I mentioned in the article that because salt is one of the basic elements of life, we all need salt in order to exist, and it's the most stable of those elements in our life. That it's when a covenant is made that is going to endure forever, it's given the title of a covenant of salt. And that was what Yahweh made with David, that there would always be someone in his lineage that would be sitting on the throne of the king as the king of Israel.
Wow. Okay. So I know this is scriptural. This is just an aside question, I guess. Maybe you know, maybe you don't. So I suppose now, though, it's not kings anymore, it's politics. So that wouldn't really. I was just wondering if the gentlemen that are currently in power in Israel have any lineage to David or not.
Well, you have to remember that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was renamed Israel. So when we speak about Israel, we're not speaking about a landmass somewhere. We're speaking about the family of Yahweh, those who embrace his 10 words and walk in them, manifesting them on a daily basis. And one of the most surprising things that hit me when I went to Israel, I learned that about 70% of that country, the Jews in that country, they don't believe in anything. The biggest challenge I had in the 6 years that I was over there was just getting them to the point where they, are getting back in touch with the God they know, Yahweh. And that presented more of a challenge than anything. Even before, I would start to talk to people about Yeshua, and the Father instructed me not to present Yeshua unless somebody came to me. When I first got over there, I had a teaching a couple of times a week that we would gather in this little restaurant, and while in Israel, the kids coming up through high school, they learn English. They're taught English in the high school, but because most of them don't have a context to be able to use it in very frequently, they forget, they just lose it. But they're all wanting to get to the United States because it is the pillar of success over there. And so we would gather a couple of times a week under the auspices of me teaching them conversational English. But it was a benefit to me because at the same time, they were teaching me conversational Hebrew. And it was just a wonderful time that I had over there. But like I said, most of the people, they just don't believe in anything. And so earlier, like you said, that belief is different from faith, being faithful to the Father's words. And but I did find that there was a small cadre of people over there that still kept the Father's words, and they are considered, in the family of Israel. And what you and I, we're not born Hebrew, but because of Yeshua and his resurrection, that opened a place where you and I could come and be involved in this intimacy with Yahweh that was in the beginning with Adam. That's what the purpose of Yeshua was to restore the kingdom of Yahweh as it was in the beginning. And you and I are able to partake of something that all of those patriarchs in the Tanakh didn't have. They longed for. They knew it was there, but they didn't have it, and they knew that was part of their inheritance. When Adam ate of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge between good and evil, the Father said that on that day that he ate of it, he would die. Well, he didn't die physically. He lived to be 930 years old. So we have to rearrange our thinking to approach what it means to die from the Father's perspective rather than from our own. And what died that day was the shared spirit that Adam had with Yahweh. And I know that it's a very popular concept that is embraced worldwide. But the scriptures, if we're going to walk in the understanding that the scriptures speak truth, there's nowhere in scripture that it says that man has a spirit intrinsic to himself. There's only one spirit, and his name is Yahweh. And if we are not involved in the sharing of Yahweh's spirit, we have no spirit. So
then what about what we call evil spirits? What's that?
Well, we're talking about eternal spirit. Evil spirits are, they're not part of the kingdom of Yahweh. They're just holdovers from an earlier time in in the history of the earth. And, you know, Yeshua dealt with them, but they're not, and this is where we get into having to remove a lot of these impure elements, false teachings that we have been taught that, you know, there is a being, Satan, that, you know, is as important as Yahweh, that controls all the evil in the earth. Well, that's just not scriptural. I have an article, have a series of articles entitled entitled
Warfare, yes.
And one of those articles is the title of it's Chasing Lucifer. And we find in that article scripturally where Lucifer doesn't exist. And that in the beginning, in the Hebrew language, this verb, actionable verb, Satan with a little s and a hyphen, meant an adversarial opposition to Yahweh's words. Anybody or anything can present themselves as an adversarial opposition to Yahweh's words. And somehow in the translation from Hebrew and Greek to three incarnations of English, this verb Satan was changed into a noun entity by eliminating the hyphen and capitalizing the S. Now in Hebrew, there are no capitalizations as well as in Greek. So this is purely a theological move on the part of the translators to overlay their preconceived theology upon these words and redefine them. And if you, wherever it talks about Satan in the Messianic writings, if you remember that it's an actionable verb and means an adversarial opposition to Yahweh's words, you can see that when Yeshua was in the wilderness, it wasn't some entity that was tempting him. It was his own thoughts. He'd been in the wilderness for 40 days. Medically, it's a proven fact that when people, you know, fast for 40 days, on the 40th day they hunger. And that's what happened with him. He hungered and he looked at this stone and he realized he could change it. He had the power to change it into a loaf of bread. But it wasn't what the Father was saying to him. He was in that wilderness situation because he too needed to be tempted, just like we are, to cause those impure elements to come to the surface so he could deal with them. And the way he dealt with them was to not engage them, but to remind himself what the words of Yahweh are in Scripture. And that's what emboldened him and strengthened him to be able to go through those other temptations that he had.
Great segue, because again in your article, Hebrew chapter 5, verse 8, although he was a son, he learned obedience through what he suffered.
And if it was part of Yahweh's plan for his son Yeshua to suffer, and Yeshua repeatedly said, you know, that his life was the example for us to follow. And if that is the case, then we need to expect to learn obedience through the things that we suffer, because we're given in those situations, we're given the power of choice to be able to make those proper choices in spite of what we consider to be adverse circumstances, situations.
Right. You said something a little earlier that I want to touch on before I get to the last point. You said that when you were in Israel that you were guided or told to not talk about Yeshua. That's very interesting, because if you look at the writings in Shaul for Paul, he talked about Yeshua all the time. But when he ended up confronting Gentiles, he wouldn't talk about Yeshua. He would talk about Yahweh. He would talk about the Creator. And that's very interesting to me that now in this age, how the first thing we mention is not the Creator, but we automatically go to Yeshua for people that don't even know that the Father exists.
That's right. And the reason, you have to remember that when the Father opened the door, the opportunity for me to go to Israel, first of all, it was a promise that he had made to me 40 years earlier that I'd be living in Israel. Of course, I thought at the time it was going to be next month or possibly next year, but it was going to be sometime immediate. And then I discovered 40 years later that he hadn't forgotten that promise. He's faithful to keep the words that he says to us. And he opened the door for me to go and live in Israel. But on the plane ride over the Atlantic Ocean, he said to me, when you get to Israel, don't tell anybody you're a Christian. And of course, I was still involved in the Christian mindset, and I began to rebuke the voice and get out of here, Satan, and all of that stuff. But after a while, when the voice kept coming back, I thought, well, maybe I need to listen to this. And sure enough, when I got over there, what I discovered was that every one of those Jews carry a satchel around with them that has a label Christian on it. And if they think that you're a Christian, you go into that satchel along with the Crusaders and the Catholic Church, Hitler, all of the people who have, for most of history, the ones that have tortured and persecuted the Jews as a whole have done it under the banner of Christianity.
Right.
And if you approach them from that standpoint, you're going to go in that satchel with all the rest of those cruds, and you don't ever come out. They put that label on you, and that's where you stay. So in my roundtable experience with conversational English, it wasn't, and it was, it started off with one or two people, and it just grew. People would bring their friends and relatives, and they'd come and sit. And every time we got together, it was a different group. There were some of those that came all the time, but mostly it was just a different makeup. And usually within a few minutes of sitting down and, getting the how-to-dos out of the way and start talking, somebody would lean across the table and ask me, what are you doing here? Why did you leave this affluent country of the United States to come over here to this war-torn wasteland? And it was at that point that I would be able to share with them my encounter with this God that they knew, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And it was without any religious influence that I met the author and creator of truth. And then it was from that place that I would be able to reintroduce them to the one who they all do. You know, they've been taught from the time they were toddlers, most of them, a lot of them from before they even learned to walk.
Right. Okay. Last thing I wanted to mention, as I was going through the article, you talked about a blacksmith. And the blacksmith took this piece of metal and he put it in the coals of the fire and it became white hot, and then he pulled it out and started banging on it.
Just mercilessly beating the crap out of it.
and then put it back in the water to sort of
cool
it down and keep the shape. And then he said something. He said, and it's got to be done 7 times, or at least 7 times.
He was making what is known as tempered steel, and it's one of the hardest substances known to man.
Right.
And the way you get steel tempered is you go through that process at least 7 times.
Okay. And as I read that, a scripture came to me that I learned a lot of years ago when I was in the world of Christianity, but it sort of stuck. The words of Yahweh are flawless, like silver, purified in a crucible, like gold, refined 7 times.
There you go.
It just jumped out at me. It says another 7 times. So there we are. I think that's our time.
Well, again, I want to encourage everybody that's watching this video to read the article, because we're just skipping over the surface of what this thing says, and dig into it, follow the links, and see the supporting verses and other elements that we have to reach this place of truth. And if you have any questions, my email address is at the bottom of all these articles. It's on the website. Send me an email and I will answer you. It may not be immediately, but I will get back to you. And so I guess we're at the time when we get to say.
Well, before we do say the last words, I want to thank everybody that takes the time to read the articles and listen to our little discussions. We may be all over the place at times. We may not always be on point, but it is a blessing and very a honor to be able to share this time with you. And we extremely appreciate that you take the time to share your time with us. And with that, I will say shalom.
And I want to place a emphatic amen on what you just said. And so it's time to say shalom, shalom.